Olivia's fingers brushed against the cool glass of the desk, her mind racing as she stepped into the study. The scent of old books and dust hung in the air, a place she had once found comfort in, but now felt more like a tomb. It had been years since she had come here. Years since her mentor, Dr. Nathaniel Grant, had passed away, leaving behind nothing but memories and a mystery that had always haunted her. She hesitated at the door. The study was cluttered, papers scattered everywhere in a perfect chaos only Dr. Grant could ever understand. He had always said that disorder was the most brilliant form of organization, but Olivia didn't see it that way. For her, the mess felt like an unresolved puzzle, each piece a fragment of something she could never quite piece together. Her mind wandered back to the last time she had spoken to him. He had always been so full of energy, so alive with ideas that stretched the limits of reason. "Olivia," he had said with that knowing smile of his, "science is only the beginning. There's more to the universe than we can see with our eyes." That statement had always stuck with her, even though she never fully understood what he meant. Science, she thought, had its boundaries. Physics, chemistry, biology, each discipline had its limits. She had worked so hard, earning her doctorate and climbing her way up the academic ladder, to prove that rational thought and evidence were the only things that mattered. Yet, the haunting question her mentor had left behind, what lies beyond, was something she couldn't ignore anymore. Her heart pounded as she stepped further into the room. She had no idea what had drawn her here tonight, but there was a pull, an undeniable force that made her feel like she was on the verge of uncovering something that had been hidden for far too long. She had been avoiding it, but now it was time to face the truth. She could feel it in the air, a charged presence, as though Dr. Grant's very spirit still lingered in this space. The old leather chair creaked as she sank into it. She could barely breathe, her eyes falling on the small wooden box sitting on the far corner of the desk. She had never noticed it before. It was plain, unremarkable even, but something about it caught her attention. Her fingers brushed against its smooth surface as she reached for it, her mind racing with questions. What was it? What could it possibly contain? With a quick motion, she opened the box. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed with age and sealed tightly with wax. She gasped, recognizing the handwriting instantly. It was Dr. Grant's. The same looping, elegant script that had once filled pages of scientific journals now held a message meant only for her. Olivia's pulse quickened. She couldn't help but feel a shiver crawl up her spine as she carefully broke the seal. The letter inside was thin, yet its contents felt like a weight that had been pressing on her for years. As she unfolded the paper, she immediately recognized the first few words. "Olivia, if you're reading this, it means I am no longer here to explain. But you must understand, what I have discovered is far beyond what anyone could have imagined. This is not a theory, it is the truth." She blinked, her mind racing. What truth? What could he have discovered that was so important? The letter continued. "I have unlocked the secret of consciousness, what happens to us after we die. It is not a theory, not a figment of imagination, but a very real and tangible phenomenon. The mind, the soul, the essence of who we are, does not vanish upon death. It transitions, it continues. There is a way to prove this, to show the world that consciousness persists beyond the physical realm." Olivia felt her breath catch in her throat. Her hands trembled as she continued reading. "But I must warn you, Olivia. To reveal this truth, you must be prepared. What you will find is beyond your understanding. It will challenge everything you know, everything you have ever believed. It will change your life, and it may very well cost you everything." A cold chill ran through Olivia's body, her mind struggling to grasp what she was reading. This was insane. She knew it had to be. The laws of physics didn't allow for such things. The very idea that consciousness could exist beyond death defied every rule of science she had ever studied. It sounded like something from a science fiction novel, not something a man like Dr. Grant would have believed in. And yet, here it was. His final message to her. His final request. She had always known Dr. Grant as a man of science, a man who relied on evidence, on rational thought. But this letter, it seemed to suggest that there was more, much more, than anyone could ever comprehend. Olivia's hands shook as she folded the letter back up and placed it carefully inside the box. The weight of what she had just read pressed down on her chest, suffocating her. The world around her seemed to blur, the study fading into the background as she tried to process what this could mean. Her mind was a whirl of emotions, confusion, fear, curiosity. How could this be real? How could Dr. Grant have discovered something so monumental and left it for her to uncover? Her heart hammered in her chest, and for the first time in years, she felt truly afraid. This wasn't just a scientific discovery, it was a question that threatened everything she thought she knew. It wasn't just about physics anymore. It was about life itself, about the very nature of existence. Olivia stood up suddenly, her mind racing. What should she do? Should she investigate this? Should she even try to find out more? What if it was dangerous? What if this was some twisted joke? But deep down, she knew she couldn't ignore it. She had to know. The question was too powerful, too significant to just walk away from. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. She almost laughed at herself. It felt absurd, but it was the only thing she could think of to shake off the creeping sense of unease that had taken over her. This story might just spark a new beginning, she muttered under her breath. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? She turned the question inward, knowing the answer. It was the pursuit of truth. The search for answers. Even if it meant diving into the unknown. Even if it meant risking everything she had. With one final glance around the study, Olivia gathered the courage to begin her search. She didn't know what she would find, or where it would lead, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't turn back now. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Olivia sat back in the worn leather chair, still holding the letter in her hands, but her thoughts had already wandered to a time long before she stepped into Dr. Grant's study. The memories came in waves, crashing over her with a force she hadn't expected. She had spent so many years building walls around herself, pushing down the things that hurt, the things she couldn't change. But tonight, everything felt different. The summer she was 15 had changed her forever. It was the summer she lost her father. Her father had been her everything, a brilliant, curious man who loved science and stories in equal measure. He had taught her to look at the world with wonder, to ask questions, to never stop searching for answers. Every weekend, they'd go to the observatory in their town and gaze up at the stars. He'd tell her stories of galaxies far away, and she'd hang on his every word, imagining a universe of infinite possibilities. They shared a bond that was unspoken but understood, one forged through shared knowledge and an insatiable thirst for understanding. Then, one quiet afternoon, it all ended. Olivia had been at school when she received the call. Her father had died suddenly of a heart attack, just like that. The doctors said it was the result of a rare and unexpected arrhythmia, a problem that even the best specialists hadn't caught in time. He had been gone before he hit the floor. The world she knew shattered in an instant. At first, Olivia didn't know how to react. The grief hit her in waves, but it was the confusion that tore at her most. She was too young to understand the finality of death. Too young to grasp that the man who had been her whole world was never coming back. She would never again share another Sunday morning of stargazing, never again hear his voice explaining the wonders of the universe. The harsh finality of it all haunted her. Her mother, however, had reacted differently. Elizabeth Monroe, a renowned theoretical physicist in her own right, threw herself even deeper into her work. She buried herself in equations, theories, and lectures, using the science she loved as a shield to protect herself from the grief. She didn't have time for mourning. She didn't have time for anything that didn't make sense or didn't have an answer. And in the absence of her mother's emotional support, Olivia became more focused on her studies. She knew that if she could just prove something, just find an answer to one of the endless questions she had swirling in her head, she might be able to fill the emptiness inside her. The silence that echoed in her heart after losing her father. Years passed, and Olivia excelled academically. She pushed through the pain, driven by the need for validation, driven by the need to prove that everything, even death, had an explanation. But despite all of her academic successes, something was missing. She had achieved everything she set out to do, a PhD in physics, a promising career, and a growing reputation in the scientific community. But deep down, there was a gnawing emptiness, a sense that something vital had been left unaddressed. That's when Dr. Nathaniel Grant had come into her life. He had been a visiting professor at her university, and his lectures had sparked something within Olivia. He was a man who, like her father, didn't believe in the boundaries of science. He saw it as a tool, not as the limit. Dr. Grant's theories were radical, often dismissed by more traditional scholars, but to Olivia, they were a breath of fresh air. He saw the world through a lens of infinite possibility, where the mind, the soul, and the universe could all be connected through the fundamental laws of physics. For him, nothing was impossible. Dr. Grant saw something in Olivia that others didn't. He recognized her intellectual drive and, more importantly, he saw her pain. She wasn't just a brilliant physicist. She was a woman haunted by unanswered questions, by the absence of the man who had shaped her understanding of the world. Their relationship had started with professional admiration, but over time, it became something deeper. Dr. Grant became a mentor, a father figure of sorts. He understood her in a way no one else did. They would sit for hours, discussing theories that challenged conventional wisdom, exploring ideas that seemed too fantastical to be taken seriously. For Olivia, those moments in Dr. Grant's office, when they would pore over equations and debate the existence of life after death, were some of the only moments where she truly felt alive. But just like everything else in her life, their relationship was complicated. Dr. Grant's theories had grown more and more radical, and the scientific community began to grow weary of his unconventional ideas. Olivia, too, found herself torn. She had spent so long building her career on rationality and logic, but the more she worked with Dr. Grant, the more she found herself questioning those very principles. What if the universe didn't operate the way science had taught her? What if there was something beyond the known? What if life wasn't just about what could be measured and observed? Olivia hadn't shared her doubts with anyone. She hadn't even shared them with Ethan. Ethan, he had been her childhood friend, the one person she'd always turned to when the weight of the world got too heavy. They had grown up together, sharing the same fascination with the mysteries of the universe. But as they got older, their paths diverged. Ethan had taken a more spiritual route, delving into philosophy and metaphysics, while Olivia threw herself deeper into the world of hard science. They had grown apart, their conversations becoming more strained as they realized they no longer shared the same worldview. Olivia often wondered what would have happened if she had kept in touch with him. Would his beliefs have softened her scientific skepticism? Would his warmth have helped her deal with the isolation she felt, both professionally and emotionally? The thoughts were fleeting, but they lingered as she sat in Dr. Grant's study, staring down at the letter that had changed everything. What I have discovered is far beyond what anyone could have imagined. She thought about her father, about Dr. Grant, and about the path she was now standing at the edge of. There were no guarantees, no clear answers, just a road filled with uncertainty. But there was one thing she knew for sure: she couldn't keep running from the questions. She had spent her entire life seeking answers, and this was the one that might finally bring her the closure she'd been searching for. The question that had once seemed so simple, the question of what happens after we die, was now at the forefront of her mind. And no matter how much she wanted to walk away, she knew she couldn't. Not now. Not when she had the chance to uncover the truth. Olivia's heart pounded as she paced back and forth in her apartment, the letter from Dr. Grant still clutched tightly in her hand. She couldn't stop replaying the words over and over again in her mind. This is not a theory, it is the truth. The weight of those words felt suffocating, and yet, the deeper she thought about it, the more her curiosity grew. She had always been a skeptic, a scientist driven by the pursuit of answers. But this was beyond anything she had ever imagined. Was it possible? Could there really be something after death? It went against everything she had ever been taught, everything she had ever believed. The concept of consciousness surviving after death sounded like pseudoscience, like something conjured up by desperate minds who couldn't accept the finality of existence. But Dr. Grant wasn't desperate. He was brilliant. And if anyone could have discovered something so groundbreaking, it was him. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. She glanced up, startled. She wasn't expecting anyone, especially not at this late hour. Hesitant, she walked over to the door, opened it, and found Ethan standing on the other side. Ethan? Her voice caught in her throat. He was the last person she expected to see right now. Ethan was tall, with disheveled dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold more questions than answers. He looked different from the last time she saw him, more rugged somehow, but the same warmth lingered in his gaze. He had been her childhood friend, the person who knew her better than anyone else, but their lives had diverged over the years. She hadn't seen him in months, not since their last awkward conversation about the path she was taking in her career and his own spiritual journey. "I know it's late," he said, stepping past her without waiting for an invitation, "but I had to talk to you." Olivia stepped back, surprised by his sudden appearance. "What's going on, Ethan? Why are you here?" Ethan ran a hand through his hair and sighed. He seemed nervous, almost as though he was weighing his words carefully. I've been thinking a lot about what you said to me last time we spoke. About your work with Dr. Grant." Olivia's stomach twisted. She had been avoiding Ethan for months, and this was the last thing she wanted to discuss. She didn't want to drag him into her confusion and doubt. She didn't want him to see her vulnerable, questioning everything she'd worked so hard to build. "What about Dr. Grant?" she asked, trying to sound indifferent, though she could feel her heart rate picking up. Ethan paused. "I know you don't believe in all that metaphysical stuff I talk about. I get it. But what if? What if there's something to it? Something more than what science can explain?" Olivia frowned, unsure of how to respond. She wanted to dismiss him, to tell him that science had all the answers. That belief in something beyond the physical realm was nothing more than a crutch for the fearful. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. Not anymore. "Ethan, I don't know what to believe anymore," she admitted. "I've spent my whole life seeking answers, but now, I'm not sure if the answers I've found are the right ones." She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I've been reading something Dr. Grant left behind, and it's shaking everything I thought I knew." Ethan's eyes widened slightly, and he stepped closer. "What did he leave you?" Olivia hesitated, looking down at the letter once again. She hadn't told anyone about it yet, too afraid that they'd think she was losing her grip on reality. But here was Ethan, the one person who had always been able to talk her through the toughest of times. He deserved to know. Taking a deep breath, Olivia handed him the letter. Ethan read through it silently, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he looked up at her with an almost knowing expression. "Olivia, I've been down that path. I've read those kinds of things before. But there's something you need to understand." "What's that?" Olivia asked, her voice shaky. "The truth is, there's more out there than we can see. We're just scratching the surface with science. There are things we don't even have the language to describe yet. Dr. Grant, I think, was on the verge of discovering something that could change everything. But you're not just talking about physics anymore. You're talking about something much bigger. You can't keep pushing these questions aside. Olivia's mind spun. Ethan had always been the dreamer, the one who saw the world through rose-colored glasses. He believed in the unseen, the inexplicable. But she had never been like him. She had always believed in evidence, in facts, in what could be measured and tested. And yet, here she was, facing a letter from Dr. Grant that spoke of things she could not explain. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Olivia whispered, looking down at the letter once more. "I don't know if I'm ready to uncover something that could break everything I've built. I don't even know if I want to know what's on the other side of this." Ethan reached out and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I know you're scared, Olivia, but you've always been the one who pushes forward, even when things get tough, even when it's hard to see the way ahead." Olivia swallowed hard, her chest tightening as her emotions swirled. She wanted to ignore the letter, to go back to the world where things made sense. But Ethan was right. She couldn't unsee it. She couldn't turn her back on the one question that had always haunted her. What happens after we die? It was the question that had driven her to become a scientist in the first place. It was the reason she had pursued the impossible. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, then looked at Ethan with new resolve. "I can't turn back now. I have to know the truth." Ethan smiled softly, as if he had been waiting for her to say those very words. "Then you're ready." The following day, Olivia sat in her car, staring at the address written on the back of the envelope Dr. Grant had sent her. The words on the paper were blurry now, not because she couldn't read them, but because her mind had been racing all night. She hadn't slept. The letter. Ethan's words. The way everything seemed to be spiraling out of her control. It all felt like a dream, or maybe a nightmare. She started the engine, the low hum of the car doing little to calm the frantic beat of her heart. Olivia knew that she couldn't go back now. The moment she had allowed herself to entertain the possibility that there was something more than just science, something beyond death, she had crossed a line. There was no turning back to the life she knew before. Not now. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel as she took the familiar road out of the city, heading to Dr. Grant's private lab. She had visited his facility before. Of course, his work had been groundbreaking, after all, but never with this sense of urgency. Today, it felt like she was driving towards something that could either free her or completely shatter everything she believed in. The facility was located on the outskirts of town, tucked away on a secluded piece of land that had once belonged to Dr. Grant's family. It was a modest place, with a long driveway that wound through trees and fields, leading to a large, unassuming building that had been converted into his research space. It looked more like an old farmhouse than the headquarters of a man who was on the cusp of revolutionizing the way the world understood life and death. Olivia parked her car and stepped out, her shoes crunching against the gravel. The air was cooler than she expected for a spring morning, and a faint breeze stirred the tall grass that grew in the yard. Everything around her felt oddly still, like the world was holding its breath. As she made her way up the front steps and into the building, she felt a wave of anticipation wash over her. She had no idea what she was about to uncover, but she knew it was going to be something that would change everything. Dr. Grant was waiting for her inside, sitting behind a cluttered desk, his fingers steepled as he stared at her with those penetrating eyes. He didn't stand when she entered, but his gaze followed her, steady and unwavering. "Olivia," he said simply, his voice low and gravelly. "I'm glad you came." She didn't respond immediately, her eyes scanning the room. It was cluttered, filled with stacks of research papers, open books, and strange devices that looked more like scientific relics than anything she'd ever seen in a modern lab. A whiteboard covered with equations and symbols took up an entire wall, some of them so complex they made her head spin. But it wasn't the lab that mattered now, it was the man in front of her. I didn't think I had a choice, Olivia finally said, her voice shaking slightly. You've sent me a letter that says you've discovered something that could change everything. Something about life after death. Dr. Grant didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled faintly. It's not a theory, Olivia. It's a reality. She clenched her fists, trying to steady herself. How? How can you be so sure? Dr. Grant leaned forward, his gaze never leaving hers. Because I've seen it. I've been there. Olivia's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean, you've seen it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Grant's eyes grew darker, as though he were reliving something that haunted him. I've been conducting experiments for years, trying to understand the nature of consciousness, how the mind and the body are connected. And then, one day, I stumbled upon something I wasn't prepared for. I discovered a way to access what I believe is the gateway to the afterlife. Not just spiritually, but scientifically. A place where consciousness persists after the body dies. Olivia felt a cold rush run through her veins. This was insane. She had spent her whole life looking for answers within the confines of established science, never considering anything outside of the measurable, observable world. But here was Dr. Grant, someone she respected, someone who had been her mentor, telling her something that defied all logic, all reason. Are you saying you've been to this place? Olivia's voice was barely audible, and she felt a chill crawl up her spine. Dr. Grant nodded slowly. Yes, and I've brought something back with me. Proof that consciousness continues. That life does not end at death. Olivia's mind reeled. She had heard of near-death experiences, of people who claimed to have glimpsed the afterlife, but this was different. This wasn't a spiritual or religious experience. This was science, science that could potentially rewrite everything she knew about the human mind, about existence itself. Why didn't you tell anyone? She asked, her voice shaky. Dr. Grant's smile faltered. Because no one would believe me. Not the scientific community. Not the world. They would dismiss it as delusion, as a result of experimental error. I couldn't risk that. But you, Olivia, you've always been different. You've always sought the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it is. That's why I've brought you here. Olivia felt her knees go weak. The weight of his words pressed down on her like a physical force. She had never been faced with a choice like this before. She had always relied on facts, on evidence. But here she was, standing in front of a man who claimed to have discovered something that went beyond all the laws of science she had spent her life studying. You want me to help you prove this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Grant nodded. I do. Because, Olivia, this isn't just about science anymore. It's about something much bigger. It's about understanding what happens when we die. It's about understanding the very nature of existence. Olivia's thoughts were a whirlwind. She had always believed that the pursuit of knowledge was the most important thing in life, but now she was being asked to step into a realm where science and faith collided, where the lines between reality and the unknown blurred. This was no longer just a scientific question, it was a matter of life and death. Her hand trembled as she reached for the chair beside the desk and sat down, her mind racing. Was she ready for this? Was she ready to risk everything she had built, her career, her credibility, and her entire worldview, to uncover the truth about life after death? But deep down, she knew the answer. She had always been the type to push forward, to search for answers no matter how difficult or dangerous the journey. And this was the greatest question of all. I'll help you, Olivia said quietly. But we do this on my terms. We follow the science. No shortcuts. Dr. Grant's smile returned, more genuine this time. Agreed. And with that, the journey into the unknown began. Days passed in a blur, each one folding into the next, as Olivia immersed herself in Dr. Grant's research. Every day, the theory became more real and yet more distant. The weight of it all was suffocating, as if she were standing on the edge of a precipice, peering into a chasm she wasn't sure she wanted to jump into. The lab was where she spent most of her time now, days blending together as she ran simulations, analyzed data, and helped Dr. Grant fine-tune the methods that he insisted were the key to unlocking the ultimate mystery of existence, the afterlife. But with each breakthrough, Olivia found herself drowning in uncertainty. Was it truly possible? Could they really prove what no one had ever dared to question before? One evening, as the soft glow of the setting sun filtered through the windows of the lab, Olivia stood by the whiteboard, scribbling complex equations, her mind fogged with exhaustion. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, swirling between skepticism and belief, between science and the unknown. There were moments when she felt like she was on the brink of an understanding so profound that it could tear apart the very fabric of reality. But then there were other moments when her doubts crept back in, quiet and insidious. Was she losing herself in this pursuit? Was she becoming too wrapped up in something that defied logic, defied everything she had worked so hard to achieve? Olivia, Dr. Grant's voice cut through the silence, low and thoughtful. She turned to find him standing by the door, watching her with an unreadable expression. "Is something wrong?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. She wiped her forehead, pushing back the strands of hair that had fallen loose. She was exhausted, the physical toll of late nights and mental strain beginning to take its toll. But it wasn't just the exhaustion. It was the creeping fear that she was treading into something that could break her. "I don't know anymore," Olivia replied, her voice strained. "I don't know what I believe anymore. I've spent my whole life searching for answers, but now it feels like I'm stepping into an abyss I'm not sure I can climb out of." Dr. Grant stepped closer, his eyes filled with empathy. "This is hard, Olivia. I know. But you've made it this far because you have the strength to face what others won't. You've always been willing to question the world around you. Don't let fear stop you now." She shook her head. "But this isn't just a question about science. This is bigger than that. This is about life and death." And she swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. "I'm scared. What if we're wrong? What if we're digging into something that we aren't prepared to understand?" Dr. Grant's expression softened, and for the first time, Olivia saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the burden he had been carrying all along. "I've asked myself those same questions, Olivia. I've had nights where I doubted everything. But that's what this is about. This isn't just about proving a theory, it's about finding the truth. The truth is what drives us even when we're terrified." For a long moment, Olivia simply stood there, the words hanging between them like an unspoken truth. The doubt, the fear, it was suffocating, but at the same time, it was undeniable. She had always been the one to push forward, to forge ahead in the pursuit of knowledge. But this was different. This was a journey into the unknown, a journey where the destination was shrouded in darkness. Her thoughts turned to Ethan. She hadn't spoken to him in days, not since their last conversation. She could still hear his voice in her mind. There's more out there than we can see. His belief in something beyond the physical world had always puzzled her, but now, more than ever, she found herself wondering if there was some truth to it. What if Ethan was right? What if there was something beyond the veil of death, something that science had never been able to reach? Olivia looked up at Dr. Grant, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "What if we fail?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What if we're not meant to know?" He was silent for a long time, as though weighing her question carefully. Then, finally, he spoke. "Failure is a part of discovery, Olivia. Sometimes, we have to fail to find the truth. But even in failure, we learn. And what we've uncovered here, what we're on the verge of, is the kind of discovery that can change everything. It's worth the risk." The air between them was thick with tension, the weight of their shared burden pulling them closer. Olivia closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, and for the first time in days, she felt a sense of clarity. She had been running from the truth, from the fear of the unknown. But now she knew what she had to do. "I can't keep running from this," Olivia said, her voice steady, despite the storm raging inside her. "I need to know. I need to understand. I need to know what happens when we die." Dr. Grant nodded solemnly. "Then we move forward together." In that moment, something shifted inside Olivia. The fear didn't go away. It would never completely disappear, but it no longer controlled her. There was something more important than fear now. It was the truth. The truth that had eluded humanity for centuries, the truth that Dr. Grant had dedicated his life to uncovering, and the truth that she now had a part in discovering. With newfound resolve, Olivia turned back to the whiteboard, her hand steady as she continued her calculations. The answers were within her reach, and she wasn't going to stop until she had them. But as she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that the truth, once uncovered, might be more than she was ready to handle. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The weeks that followed were a blur of intense work, sleepless nights, and moments of profound revelation. Olivia found herself increasingly consumed by Dr. Grant's theories, poring over data that no one else in the scientific community had ever dared to analyze. The experiments, designed to explore consciousness beyond the physical realm, were unlike anything she had ever imagined. They pushed the boundaries of what was possible and, in many ways, made her question everything she had once held as truth. It wasn't just the data that was unsettling, it was the things she couldn't measure, the inexplicable experiences that had begun to seep into their work. At times, Olivia could swear she felt an eerie presence in the lab. Strange sounds, subtle changes in temperature, and flickering lights that defied logical explanation. It was as if something was watching them, waiting for them to cross a line they hadn't yet crossed. Still, Olivia pushed forward. Every day, she found herself diving deeper into the mysteries of the afterlife. They were now working with technology that could allow them to record and study the moments when consciousness might shift from life to death. The implications of their work were staggering, and she was both exhilarated and terrified by the possibilities. One afternoon, as Olivia sat alone in the lab, reviewing the latest data from their most recent trial, Dr. Grant walked in, his face grim. "Olivia, we need to talk," he said, his voice quieter than usual. There was an edge to it, a sense of urgency that caught her off guard. She turned toward him, her heart skipping a beat. "What's wrong?" Dr. Grant hesitated, his gaze darting to the papers on the table before locking eyes with her. "I've been going over the data we've gathered. There's something I haven't told you." Olivia's pulse quickened. "What do you mean? You're scaring me." He took a deep breath and sat down across from her, his face pale. "The theory is correct. I'm certain of it. There's life after death. Consciousness doesn't just cease to exist. It transforms, it moves." But he faltered, the words seemingly stuck in his throat. "I've seen it. I've felt it. And it's not what I expected." Olivia felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Dr. Grant said softly, "that I think we've uncovered something far more profound than we realized. The afterlife isn't just a peaceful existence or a continuation of life. It's—" He paused, struggling to find the right words. "It's not just an extension of our world. It's something else entirely. And it's not always what we hope for." For a long moment, there was silence. Olivia's mind raced, trying to process what Dr. Grant had just said. The possibility that there was life after death had always seemed distant, abstract, something only philosophers and theologians could truly wrestle with. But now, hearing the fear in Dr. Grant's voice, it felt like it was suddenly real, too real. She swallowed hard. "What do you mean by something else entirely?" Dr. Grant's voice dropped even lower. I think we're dealing with something beyond human comprehension. beyond what we can understand as living beings. I've seen flashes of it, moments when our experimenters have crossed over, small, fragmented glimpses of the other side. And I'm not sure we're ready for what we might find there. The room seemed to close in on Olivia as the weight of his words settled into her chest. She had always believed that science could answer all questions, that the unknown was just another frontier waiting to be explored. But now, Dr. Grant was suggesting that the answers they were seeking might be too dangerous, too unsettling to comprehend. She looked at him, her thoughts scattered. Are you saying we should stop? Are we crossing a line we shouldn't be crossing? Dr. Grant shook his head slowly. I'm not sure what we should do. But I am sure of one thing. We've opened a door that can't be closed. The questions we're asking now are bigger than us. And if we're not careful, we might just unravel everything. Olivia sat back in her chair, her mind in turmoil. The stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. This wasn't just about proving a theory anymore. It was about uncovering something that had the power to change everything. Was she ready to confront that? Was anyone? For a while, they sat in silence, the weight of their conversation hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Finally, Olivia spoke, her voice quieter than usual. We've come this far, she said. We can't back down now. But we have to be careful. We need to make sure we're doing this for the right reasons, not out of curiosity or ambition. Dr. Grant met her gaze, his eyes filled with an intensity that sent a shiver through her. I agree. But sometimes, curiosity is the only thing that pushes us forward. We have to know what's on the other side. We owe it to ourselves and to everyone who's ever wondered. A heavy silence settled between them, and Olivia knew that their journey was no longer just about science. It was about something far more profound. The questions they were asking weren't just academic, they were personal, existential. The pursuit of knowledge had brought them to a precipice, and they were standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. Olivia thought about Ethan again. She thought about their late-night conversations, how he had always spoken about life and death as if they were simply two sides of the same coin. His belief that there was something beyond this life, the same belief that had seemed so impossible to her, now seemed to take on a new meaning. Had Ethan known something she hadn't? Had he been right all along? The door to the unknown had been opened, and there was no going back. Olivia didn't know where this journey would lead, or what they would uncover. But one thing was certain: life, as she had known it, would never be the same again. As Olivia and Dr. Grant stood in the lab that day, staring at the data that had brought them to this point, she realized that the pursuit of truth was not without its costs. But it was a cost she was willing to pay. The answers they sought were out there, waiting to be discovered. And Olivia was ready to face whatever came next. The days that followed were like walking through a fog, each step uncertain and heavy with the knowledge that they were no longer simply studying a theory. They were crossing into uncharted territory. Olivia and Dr. Grant were no longer just colleagues. They were explorers on the precipice of uncovering something far greater than either of them had anticipated. Olivia's mind was reeling, filled with flashes of the things Dr. Grant had revealed to her, the glimpses of the other side, the eerie sensations in the lab. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that something was lurking just beyond the veil of reality, waiting for them to take that final step. The weight of it all seemed to press down on her every day, but it also pushed her forward. She had come too far to stop now. Dr. Grant had become quieter in the past few days, withdrawn in a way that made Olivia uneasy. He had always been intense, driven, but now there was a new edge to him, a kind of haunted look in his eyes, as though he had seen something he wasn't prepared for, something he couldn't unsee. It was late one night when Olivia found herself alone in the lab, the soft hum of the equipment and the quiet buzz of the fluorescent lights filling the space with an almost unnatural stillness. The data was overwhelming, but she couldn't tear herself away. She had to see the experiment through, to understand it fully, to confirm what Dr. Grant had hinted at. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped. Olivia felt it before she saw it, a chill in the air that sent a shiver down her spine. She glanced around, her heart racing, but the lab was empty. It was just her. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was there, something unseen. She tried to focus on the data in front of her, but the coldness only grew stronger until she could see her breath in the air. It was a subtle thing at first, just a slight mist in the air, nothing that should have been there. But as she looked closer, she saw something else, something that made her freeze in place. A shadow moved in the corner of the room, a dark shape that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. Olivia's pulse quickened. It wasn't just a trick of the light, it was real, a figure moving in the farthest corner of her vision. She blinked, but it didn't disappear. Instead, it grew clearer, more distinct. A voice, soft, almost imperceptible, whispered her name. Olivia. Her breath caught in her throat. She stood frozen, staring at the empty corner of the room, her eyes wide with disbelief. She had to be imagining it. It was impossible. Olivia, the voice called again, closer this time. She turned quickly, but there was no one there. The room was silent once more, save for the soft hum of the equipment. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment, she wondered if she was losing her mind. But then she saw it again. A figure shadowed, indistinct, hovering near the entrance to the lab. It wasn't a person, not exactly. It was a shape, a presence, something that defied explanation. And yet, there it was, standing just beyond the edge of her perception. The temperature dropped further, and the whisper came again, louder this time. It's not what you think, Olivia. Her breath hitched. Was this the other side? The afterlife that Dr. Grant had warned her about? Or was this something else? Something even more unsettling? Before she could react, the figure was gone. The temperature returned to normal, and the room felt as though it had never been touched by the eerie presence that had just filled it. Olivia staggered backward, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing. What had just happened? What had she seen? And why did it feel like it was trying to tell her something? She didn't know how long she stood there, trying to steady her breathing, trying to make sense of what she had just experienced. But one thing was certain, there was more to this than she had ever imagined. And it wasn't just a scientific discovery, they were dealing with something far beyond the reach of their experiments. They had opened a door to the unknown, and whatever lay beyond it was reaching back. She needed answers. The next morning, Olivia found Dr. Grant in his office, staring at a collection of notes. His face was pale, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. There was a tension in the air, something unspoken between them. Dr. Grant, Olivia began, her voice shaky. I saw something last night. In the lab. A figure. It was like a shadow, but it was different. It spoke to me. Dr. Grant looked up at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, there was silence, and then he stood up slowly, his eyes filled with a strange sadness. You felt it too, didn't you? He asked, his voice quiet. The presence. The thing that's been watching us. It's been getting stronger. I was hoping it would stop, but it hasn't. Olivia's heart raced. What is it? What's happening? Dr. Grant's face softened. It's the consequence of our work, Olivia. The veil between life and death is thinner than we realized. What we're doing, it's attracting something. Something that exists beyond the boundaries of this world. And now it's beginning to make its presence known. Olivia felt a cold shiver run down her spine as his words sank in. They weren't just dealing with a scientific experiment anymore. They were dealing with forces they couldn't control, with things that existed beyond human comprehension. But why? Why is it reaching out to us? Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Grant looked at her with a haunted expression. Because we've crossed a line. We've tapped into something we don't fully understand. And now it's trying to communicate with us. It's trying to warn us. Warn us. Olivia echoed, a knot forming in her stomach. Yes, There are forces out there, forces that govern the transition between life and death. We've stirred something that was always meant to remain dormant. And now, it's aware of us. The room fell into a heavy silence. Olivia's mind was racing, trying to process the enormity of what Dr. Grant had just revealed. She had always believed in the power of science to explain everything. But now she wasn't so sure. Whatever was happening, whatever was reaching out to them, was beyond their understanding. And the more they pushed, the more dangerous it became. "We can't stop now," Olivia said, her voice firm despite the fear that was threatening to overtake her. "We've come too far. We need to see this through. We need to understand what we've awakened." Dr. Grant's eyes met hers, and for a moment, they shared a silent understanding. There was no turning back now. The questions they had been chasing were much larger than they had anticipated, and the forces they were up against were far more powerful than either of them could have imagined. But they had come too far to quit. They were about to uncover a truth that no one was prepared for. Days had bled into weeks, and Olivia had become a shadow of herself. The presence they had disturbed in their relentless pursuit of knowledge was now a constant companion, lurking at the edges of her perception, never fully revealing itself, yet always there. She had seen things, visions, moments of clarity, that couldn't be explained by logic or reason. And as the presence grew stronger, so did her resolve to understand it. But there was a growing dread deep in her gut, an intuitive feeling that this was no longer just about science. It was about survival. Dr. Grant had not spoken much about the entity they had inadvertently summoned. His face had become gaunt, his eyes hollow, as if he was haunted by something that gnawed at him from within. The last time Olivia had seen him, truly seen him, was after the latest experiment. His hands had trembled as he reviewed the data, his usually calm demeanor shattered by something more primal. There was no denying it. The boundary they had been inching toward had been crossed. The door between life and death, between what they understood and what they did not, was wide open now. And Olivia had no choice but to step through. The lab had become both a sanctuary and a prison. As much as they needed to push the experiment forward, they couldn't escape the growing tension in the air, the eerie feeling that their every move was being watched. One evening, while Olivia worked alone in the lab, she couldn't shake the sensation that she wasn't truly alone. The temperature had dropped again, and she could see her breath hanging in the air as if the room itself had become a void between two worlds. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional hum of the equipment. Her mind wandered back to the strange shadows she had seen, to the voice that had whispered her name. She wasn't imagining it, not this time. Something was real, something that should not be real. The whisper came again, this time unmistakable, as if it were right behind her. "Olivia." She spun around, her heart racing. The room was still, silent. But then she saw it. A figure appeared at the far end of the lab, barely visible, flickering like a broken reflection in a mirror. It was there, and then it was gone, vanishing into the shadows with a speed that left her breathless. Olivia stumbled back, her mind racing to process what she had just seen. The presence was no longer just a shadow on the periphery, it was now tangible, real, and as much as she wanted to deny it, she knew it was communicating with her. As the chill in the room deepened, a feeling of dread washed over her. There was something malevolent in the air, something ancient. Olivia's instincts screamed at her to run, to leave, to escape whatever was waiting for her in the darkness. But she couldn't. Not yet. The whisper came again, louder this time, filling the room with its cold, disembodied voice. "Why did you open the door?" Olivia's heart skipped a beat, her skin crawling. She wasn't imagining this. She couldn't be. The figure began to take form, solidifying in the dim light. It was a silhouette, indistinct, but there was no mistaking the presence that filled the room. It was more than just a shadow, it was a being from beyond, a force that existed outside the realm of human understanding. I didn't mean to, Olivia whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't know what we were doing. I didn't know it would lead to this. The figure shifted, its shape distorting as if it were trying to communicate something deeper, something beyond the limitations of words. Olivia's chest tightened. She could feel the weight of its gaze on her, even though she couldn't see its eyes. You were never meant to know, the voice said, its tone low and resonant, like the wind sweeping through the empty spaces of time. Some doors are not meant to be opened. The words echoed in her mind, their meaning sinking into her like a cold weight. Olivia's breath caught in her throat as she took a step forward, the urge to understand overwhelming her. What is this? What are you? What happens next? The figure hesitated, then spoke, its voice now softer, more sorrowful. The boundary has been shattered. You've crossed into a realm where the living and the dead are no longer separate. You've meddled with forces you cannot comprehend, and now the consequences are yours to bear. Suddenly, the room seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as though the very fabric of reality was trembling. Olivia felt a sharp pain in her chest, as if the room itself were squeezing the life out of her. Her breath came in short gasps, her hands trembling as she reached out to steady herself against the table. Olivia, the figure said again, its voice filled with regret. You have opened a door that cannot be closed. The path you walk now will lead you to a place where the living cannot follow. You must decide, what will you sacrifice to cross this line? Her head spun. Sacrifice? What did that mean? She wasn't ready to face the consequences, not when everything was still so unknown. But there was no time to process. The figure flickered again, its presence growing weaker. The answers you seek are within your reach, but they come with a cost. Be careful, Olivia. The price may be more than you can bear. And with that, the figure was gone, leaving Olivia alone in the cold, empty lab once more. The temperature returned to normal, but the weight of what she had just experienced lingered in the air like a thick fog. The questions were more pressing now. What had she just seen? What had it meant? Her mind raced, but she could no longer deny the truth of what was happening. She had crossed a line. She had opened a door to something far beyond the realm of science, something ancient and unknowable. And now she was faced with a choice. She could walk away, stop the experiment, and try to forget what she had uncovered. Or she could press on, risking everything for the answers that had eluded humanity for centuries. But as Olivia stood there, her body trembling, her heart heavy with the knowledge that they had awoken something that should never have been disturbed, she realized one thing above all else: there was no turning back now. The path had already been set in motion. And no matter the cost, she would continue the journey. Because the truth was out there, waiting, just beyond the veil, and Olivia wasn't ready to let go. Olivia's mind was still reeling from the encounter in the lab. The figure, the voice, everything about it felt so real, so tangible, that she couldn't dismiss it as a figment of her imagination. It had been clear, without question, that they had done something terrible. Something irreversible. But despite the chill of dread that gnawed at her bones, despite the warnings, Olivia felt an undeniable pull. She couldn't stop. She was too close to the truth now. The answers she'd been chasing, the questions that had plagued her for years, were just out of reach, and she wasn't about to let them slip away. The next morning, Olivia met Dr. Grant in the lab as usual, though she could see the weariness in his face. He hadn't slept much, she suspected, not after what had happened. And yet, there was something different about him now. A kind of detached calm, as if he had already resigned himself to the consequences. Olivia, Dr. Grant said softly when she walked in. We need to talk. His voice lacked the usual fervor it once carried. It was quieter, as though he'd lost some of the energy that had driven him forward all these months. Olivia sat down at the table, looking at him intently. About what happened last night? He nodded slowly, staring at the table. We're on the verge of something far bigger than we imagined. But there's a price, Olivia. You've seen it now. You felt it. And I'm afraid it's only the beginning. His words sent a chill through her. She nodded, but her resolve hadn't wavered. I know, but I need to understand. We're so close, Dr. Grant. I can feel it. He met her gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and reluctant agreement. We are close. Too close. But this isn't just about knowledge anymore, Olivia. This is about existence itself. What we've touched, it could destroy everything. Olivia shook her head. I won't stop. Not until we've uncovered the truth. There was a long silence between them. Dr. Grant took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, as if steeling himself. Then you're ready for the consequences, I suppose. Because we've crossed into a place where science cannot help us. If we continue, we may end up losing far more than we ever thought we could gain. Olivia stood up, her resolve clear in her eyes. I'm not backing down. Dr. Grant didn't argue further, but the look in his eyes said it all. They both knew what they were up against. Later that evening, they prepared for the next phase of the experiment. The lab was filled with the soft glow of monitors, the whir of machines, the hum of electricity. But despite the high-tech equipment surrounding them, Olivia couldn't help but feel as if they were operating in a realm beyond any technology they had ever known. The door they had opened was no longer just a metaphor. It had become real. The veil between the living and the dead was thinning. Every adjustment they made, every reading they took, seemed to intensify the strange disturbances they had been experiencing. The shadows in the corners of the lab were growing bolder, more pronounced. And the whispers, the voices, were no longer subtle, no longer hidden in the back of her mind. They were sharp, clear, and demanding. Olivia, grant us passage. The voice was close now, and it wasn't just speaking to her. It was speaking to both of them, filling the room with an ethereal presence that made the air feel thick and electric. Dr. Grant's fingers trembled slightly as he adjusted the dials on the main console. The experiment was about to take a new turn. This is it, he said quietly, as if to himself. Once we trigger this, there's no going back. Olivia felt her heart pound in her chest. She looked at the monitor, watching the numbers and symbols that were beginning to warp, bend, and twist in ways that defied reason. The veil was thinning further. There was no way to explain it, no logical formula that could account for the shifting patterns they were witnessing. The equipment hummed louder, the lights flickered erratically, and suddenly everything stopped. For one long moment, the lab was completely silent. The air was still, and Olivia couldn't tell if the quiet was real or if the world itself was holding its breath. Then, the whispers began again, louder, more insistent. Olivia, Dr. Grant, it's time? The temperature dropped sharply, so cold that she could see her breath in front of her face. And then, the shadows began to move, swirling, bending into forms that shouldn't exist. Olivia's skin tingled, and she felt the weight of their presence pressing in on her. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't an illusion. This was real. Do you see it? Olivia whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing noise. Dr. Grant didn't respond immediately. He was staring at the monitor, his face pale and drawn. His expression was one of fear, of awe, and of disbelief. It's not just a doorway, Olivia. We've opened a rift between the living and the dead. Olivia's throat tightened as she took in the horrifying reality of their situation. They weren't merely studying the afterlife. They had become a part of it. The shadows in the lab grew bolder, swirling around them like a storm, flickering in and out of existence. A figure appeared at the edge of the room, barely visible. But Olivia could feel its gaze, cold, ancient, and hungry. You've crossed the line, it whispered, its voice an unsettling blend of sorrow and fury. And now, you must pay the price. Suddenly, the lab was plunged into darkness. The equipment shut off. The air grew impossibly cold, and Olivia could hear the sound of breathing, raspy, gurgling like something not quite alive. She reached for Dr. Grant's hand, but the space between them seemed to stretch. It felt as though the lab had expanded, or maybe they had shrunk. Reality itself was warping, bending in ways that shouldn't have been possible. And then, she heard it. A voice not from the shadows, but from somewhere deeper beneath the very ground they stood on. "Leave now," the voice demanded, "or you will never return." Olivia's heart pounded. This was it. The point of no return. They had crossed a boundary that should never have been crossed, and now they were paying the price. But there was no going back. They had already opened the door. Dr. Grant's voice broke the silence. "We've made our choice. We have to see this through." Olivia nodded, but her stomach twisted with fear. This wasn't just science anymore. This was a journey into the unknown, and the unknown was far more dangerous than they could have ever anticipated. The path ahead was unclear, and the cost of continuing was high. But one thing was certain. They had crossed into a realm where nothing, absolutely nothing, was as it seemed. And now, they would have to face the consequences. Olivia's breath quickened as the coldness in the air seemed to close in on her. The shadows had become more pronounced, stretching unnaturally around the edges of the lab, creeping up the walls like tendrils of smoke. The deep, raspy breathing, the feeling that something was watching them, was no longer just a distant, unsettling presence. It was here, inside the lab. The very space they had thought they understood had transformed into something alien, something that was not meant to be. Dr. Grant, despite his fear, remained focused on the monitor. His hands trembled as he tried to restart the system, but nothing responded. The lab was silent, save for the ominous noises that now filled the air, distant whispers that grew louder with every passing second. "Dr. Grant," Olivia said, her voice steady despite the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. "We have to get out of here." He didn't respond immediately. His face was ashen, eyes wide in a mixture of disbelief and terror. The room around them seemed to pulse, the walls bending inward, as though the very fabric of reality was warping. And then the voice came again. "Leave," it said, its tone low and chilling, echoing in the space between them. "The price has been paid." Olivia spun around, but the figure, the one she had seen in the shadows before, was there, clearer now. Its form was indistinct, a blur of shapes that couldn't be made out fully, but the presence it emanated was undeniable. It wasn't human. It wasn't even alive in the way she understood it. This was something ancient. Something that existed beyond time. "We should never have done this," Dr. Grant muttered under his breath, his voice a mixture of guilt and terror. His eyes locked onto the figure, but there was no defiance in them now, only fear. The figure's shape seemed to distort, growing larger in the space, its form bending and flickering with a strange, unnatural rhythm. "You've seen what lies beyond," it rasped. "And now you are bound by it. Your quest for knowledge has opened the door, and there is no way to close it." Olivia's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the gravity of the situation, the irreversible nature of what they had done. They had uncovered something beyond human understanding, beyond science, and in doing so, had crossed a line they should never have crossed. But there was still something inside her, something primal, that refused to let go. The hunger for answers, for understanding, for the truth, was so deep within her that she couldn't back away. "Not now. What happens now?" Olivia asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay composed. The figure remained silent for a long moment, its shifting shape pulsing as though it were made of the very darkness surrounding them. And then, finally, it spoke. "You will pay the price," it said, the words reverberating through her skull. "All knowledge comes with a cost. Your lives have been exchanged for the truth you sought." Olivia's stomach turned. Her mind raced. They had crossed the threshold. The price for their curiosity, whether they knew it or not, had been paid. "How?" Olivia managed to choke out, her voice strained. "How do we undo it?" The figure seemed to shift again, flickering in and out of focus. "There is no undoing," it said softly. What has been done cannot be undone. The boundaries between life and death have been blurred, and now you must walk between them. There is no returning to what you once were. Dr. Grant, ashen-faced, stood frozen, as though the weight of the figure's words had drained all the strength from him. "I didn't want this," he whispered. "I didn't think it would be like this. We were just looking for answers." The figure turned toward him, and for a brief moment, its form solidified enough that Olivia could see a shape, a humanoid figure, translucent and faint, but unmistakably there. "Answers come at a cost," it said, its voice colder than the darkest winter night. "The price is not always what you expect." Suddenly, the lights flickered again, the equipment hummed to life, and the room seemed to shake as though the very ground beneath them was shifting. Olivia could feel the air crackling with energy, raw, unfiltered, and terrifying. She turned to Dr. Grant, her thoughts racing. "We need to finish this. We need to understand what happens next." Dr. Grant met her eyes, his face a mix of dread and resignation. "Finish it? Olivia, we're no longer in control. This isn't science anymore. This is something beyond comprehension." But Olivia wasn't listening. She had come this far. She had seen too much. They had to continue. They had to understand what they had awoken. What lay on the other side of that thin, trembling veil. With trembling hands, Olivia stepped forward, her gaze locked onto the flickering monitor. It was showing something now, a new set of numbers, erratic, strange, and impossible. Patterns she had never seen before, equations that defied everything they had once believed to be true. The fabric of the universe was bending and twisting before her eyes. "We're not supposed to be seeing this, Dr. Grant said, his voice a whisper of terror. But Olivia didn't stop. She adjusted the dials, inputting the new data, the pulse of the machine syncing with the erratic patterns on the screen. She had to know what lay beyond this threshold. There had to be a way to understand it, to control it. As she made the final adjustment, the room seemed to explode with a flash of blinding light, and then everything went dark. The lights above them flickered out, and the equipment fell silent once again. A deep, oppressive silence hung in the air. And then, she heard it. The voice. "Now you will understand," it said, its tone low and resonant, as though it was speaking from the very depths of time. But at what cost? Before she could respond, a cold, unrelenting pressure pressed against her chest. It was as though the air itself had become thick, almost solid, and she couldn't breathe. Her vision blurred, and for a moment, she felt as if she were being pulled into another realm, a place far beyond the physical world. The figure reappeared, but this time it was different. It was no longer a shadow. It was solid, standing before them in full form, its eyes hollow, its presence immense. "You've seen the truth," it said, its voice shaking the very foundation of the lab. "But now, you must pay the ultimate price for it." Olivia's heart pounded in her chest, and she felt the weight of its words sink deep into her bones. This wasn't just about knowledge anymore. This was about existence itself. And she realized, too late, that she had made a terrible mistake. The cost of understanding had been more than she could have ever imagined. Olivia's breath came in short, shallow gasps as the weight of the figure's words pressed down on her chest. The very air around her seemed to thicken, the oppressive presence of the entity suffocating in its intensity. She wanted to scream, to run, to escape the nightmare they had unleashed. But there was nowhere to go. The lab, once a place of discovery and innovation, now felt like a prison, a tomb of their own making. The figure loomed before them, its form now clear and terrifying. The shadows had solidified into a shape, tall, thin, its features indistinct but undeniably present. Its hollow eyes stared directly at Olivia, an ancient, otherworldly gaze that seemed to see through her very soul. "You have crossed the threshold," the figure intoned, its voice like the distant rumble of thunder. "And now you must face what lies beyond. There is no return from this." Olivia's mind raced. The once clear path of scientific inquiry had dissolved into chaos. She and Dr. Grant had sought to uncover the secrets of the afterlife, but now they had stumbled into something far darker. They had broken the boundaries between life and death, and in doing so, had unleashed a force they could neither understand nor control. Dr. Grant's voice trembled beside her. "What do you want from us? What have we done?" The figure tilted its head slightly, its hollow eyes never leaving Olivia. "You have awakened what was never meant to be touched. The line between the living and the dead has been shattered. And now, you must choose. You cannot simply undo what has been done. The price must be paid." Olivia's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream. But there was no escape from the truth. They had opened a rift, and now they were trapped in a place between worlds. There was no undoing it. "What price?" Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper, though her insides screamed for an answer. "What do you want from us?" The figure seemed to regard her silently for a long moment, its presence hanging in the air like a dark cloud. Then, finally, it spoke again. "The price is your existence," it said softly, the words laced with an eerie calm. "You will either remain here, trapped in the space between life and death, or you will return to your world, but at a cost." Olivia's stomach turned. She looked over at Dr. Grant, his face pale with fear, but there was a certain resignation in his eyes. He understood now. The price they had paid was more than just the research they had done. It was more than just the boundaries they had crossed. It was their very lives, their very souls that were on the line. "What does that mean?" Olivia asked, her voice cracking. The figure did not respond immediately. Instead, it raised its hand, and a vision appeared before Olivia. It was her life, every moment, every choice, every triumph, and every failure. She watched as her childhood flashed before her eyes, the early days of her career, her struggles, her breakthroughs. She saw herself standing in this very lab, pushing the boundaries of science, reaching for knowledge she wasn't meant to have. And then the vision shifted. The people she had known, the loved ones she had lost, the life she had built, it all began to fade, slipping away as if it were a dream. "Your life is not yours anymore," the figure said, its voice cold. "What you seek is forbidden. And in seeking it, you have lost what made you who you are." Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes. She didn't want to lose everything. She didn't want to disappear. But she understood. The price was steep. They had reached beyond the veil of death, and in doing so, they had broken the natural order. There was no way to undo it. Dr. Grant's voice was barely audible as he spoke, his tone shaky. "If we return, will we be the same?" The figure's hollow eyes flicked toward him. "You cannot go back unchanged. The rift you've opened has altered you. Your lives, your very souls, will no longer be what they were. You will remember this moment, this choice forever. And you will carry the weight of it for as long as you live." The air grew heavier. The figure seemed to loom closer, its presence nearly suffocating. "You have two choices. Stay here, in this place between life and death, where time no longer has meaning, where you are neither alive nor dead, but forever lost. Or return to your world, but know that the cost of your actions will be your humanity. You will no longer be fully of this world. You will carry with you the knowledge of what lies beyond, and the weight of the dead will follow you wherever you go." The figure's form shifted, flickering like a flame caught in the wind. "The dead have always walked among you. You have seen them in your dreams. You have heard their whispers. But now they will never leave you." Olivia's mind reeled. There was no easy choice. Either path led to a life she didn't want to live. Staying in this liminal space would be an eternal prison, a place where they would cease to exist in any meaningful way. But returning to the world of the living, knowing what she now knew, was equally terrifying. She turned to Dr. Grant, her eyes searching his face for some kind of answer. But she knew that this was a choice only she could make. "Olivia," he said softly, I don't know what to do. But whatever you decide, I'll follow. His words, spoken with such uncertainty, broke something inside her. She had to decide. And she had to do it now. Her heart ached as she thought about everything she would lose. Her family, her friends, the life she had built. The pursuit of knowledge had led her to this moment, but at what cost? She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The figure's presence was overwhelming, but Olivia focused on the one thing that mattered most to her, the people she loved, the life she had left behind. I choose to return, she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. I will carry the knowledge with me. I will face the consequences, but I will not remain here. The figure regarded her silently for a moment, its expression unreadable. Then it nodded, slowly. So be it, it said, its voice filled with both sorrow and finality. You have made your choice. In an instant, the world around Olivia seemed to shift. The lab, the figure, the oppressive darkness, it all faded, replaced by a blinding light. She closed her eyes, feeling the sensation of falling, of being pulled from one realm into another. When the light faded, she found herself standing back in the lab. The hum of the equipment was gone. The oppressive coldness had lifted. It was as if the last few moments, everything she had experienced, had been a dream. But deep inside, she knew it hadn't been. She turned to Dr. Grant, who was standing beside her, equally shaken but alive. We're back, he whispered. Olivia nodded, though her mind was still reeling. She had returned, but she hadn't escaped. The knowledge of what lay beyond, the truth of death and the dead, would never leave her. She would carry it with her, always. The veil between life and death had been torn, and the dead would follow her, whether she wanted them to or not. And as she stood in the quiet, empty lab, she realized that her journey, her real journey, was only just beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?